Hi, hello, welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to be doing my October and November wrap up, mostly because I think November, right off the bat with the cat noises, I'm so sorry, we're just gonna have to live with that. I read a bunch of books in October and then I read a respectable amount of books in November. I think it's 16 books in October and 9 books in November. I'll recount that and put it up here somewhere, but I think that's kind of where we're at. So October was a pretty good reading month in that I read a lot of books and I also read a lot of things that I enjoyed. November was kind of a shit reading month because I feel like I spent the entire month of November with the like two wolves inside of me wanting to reread the Stormlight Archive series, like try to reread the entire series in a month because the new book comes out this Friday on December 6th. So I really wanted to do that and I wanted to vlog that experience and I was really excited about it, but November just hit me really hard and I started to feel like not depressed but just really down, really burnt out. I was just super burnt out, and so there was another part of me that also wanted to start reading a bunch of like Christmas silly romance books because I'm like, I kind of want to do a December vlog about that. And so I was like kind of back and forth throughout the entire month, like maybe I'll focus on Stormlight and I'll just do that vlog and get that out, and then I was like, no, maybe I'll do like the Christmas books because I feel like everybody needs some dumb fun right now, and I'll do that and then I'll get that out, and like neither of those were really accomplished to their fullest. I still think I'm gonna do the December books vlog, so if you're looking forward to that, that is still gonna come. And as far as the Stormlight stuff, I'm probably still going to try to post that at some point. It just won't be very topical when it comes out, unfortunately, but that's okay. It's, you know, it happens. So let's start diving into the books that I read in October. So first up, I read Two Can Play, which is a short story. It's one of the newer Ali Hazelwood like short stories. I think it's less than 200 pages. I don't actually know how many pages it is because I listened to it. But I really liked this. This is actually tragically to me probably one of my favorite Ali Hazelwood stories because it centers around these two teams, these two video game companies that are trying to kind of vie for working with a bigger company to take over continuing this video game series. Wow, I don't know if that sentencing made any sense. I hope it did. But these two smaller indie companies like hate each other, and so to get the two teams to work together to prove to this bigger company that they can work together, they decide to do a weekend trip to a cabin and they're supposed to try to get along, do some team building. And I thought it was really cute. I really love video games, so it was really fun to read. Like Ali Hazelwood books are all very centered around science, and while I really enjoy science, I am a humanities girly through and through, so science stuff just doesn't like, I think it's really cool, but I don't get it, you know? I'm not quite as entrenched in that sciencey world as I am the more video games and books and movies and stuff like that. So this one just really like spoke to me. It was just really fun, but it's a short story and I really dislike short stories, and historically I haven't loved Ali Hazelwood's short stories. That's all I'm gonna say about that. I reread a few other Ali Hazelwood books this month as well. I'm not gonna talk about them too much at length because I actually have an entire Ali Hazelwood video that I filmed and lost some footage for, so I have to refilm some sections of it, but I want to get that up pretty soon as well. And that's me reviewing every single Ali Hazelwood book that has come out because I have read them all. That video will hopefully be up soon. I just have to refilm those few minutes that I lost. I gave Two Can Play 4 out of 5. Really liked it. So then we have The Cabin at the End of the World by Paul Tremblay. I really hated this. So this became a movie. It's the newer-ish M. Night Shyamalan movie. I think it's called like Cabin in the Woods. I think that's the title of the movie version of this. I have heard that the movie ends differently, and actually when I finished this book I went and watched the ending of the movie. I just found a clip on YouTube because I was like curious how it was handled. I think I like the ending of the movie better. I hated this book. I gave it a 2 out of 5 stars. It is trying to cram two genres together that don't really mesh that well. So this book follows this family that goes and they're like staying at this cabin by the lake for the weekend, and it's this little girl and her two dads, and the little girl is like out hanging out and this guy appears and he's like, hey, I really need to speak to your dads. Can we just go talk? And so the dads, you know, feel really uncomfortable. Like the whole thing is just feeling really off, and this guy and 3 other people invade their cabin and they're like, you have to make this crazy choice because the end of the world is happening. So it's trying to mix like home invasion thriller story with potentially apocalyptic story. There's a lot of monologuing in this for it being a like kind of thriller novel. So it's inevitably, like, it's really boring. It's incredibly dissatisfying. The ending, terrible, terrible, terrible. I hated the ending. The book is just not fun. It is not good. What else? What else is there to say about this book? Yeah, it was shockingly boring. Next up, I have Not Another Love Song by Julie Soto. This I gave 3 out of 5 stars. It was very passable. It was fine. I think it's one of those books that as time has gone by, I remember it less and less. It just didn't stick with me. You have these 2 main characters who are kind of prodigies in the music world. I think they both play Nope, one of them plays cello, one of them plays violin. And they have kind of some competition, but they ultimately like fall in love. You know, it's pretty basic. If I'm being honest, the more time I've had away from it, the more I'm like, it's just fine. I don't necessarily recommend it, but I also don't not recommend it. You know, like if it's your thing, if you are interested in that kind of storyline, if you like the butting heads and 2 highly competitive people, you know, it's all fine. I think it's highly forgettable, obviously, because I can't find anything to say about it. I wish I had more, but also maybe I don't, because maybe that tells you everything that you need to know about it. Okay, next up, oh my god. Okay, next up is Romantic Comedy by Curtis Sittenfeld. Easily, probably the worst, or at least top 3 worst books that I've read this year. This book, everybody has said it, is neither romantic nor is it a comedy. It is so bad. The whole premise of this book is that we have our main character who works at a SNL type TV show. They don't call it SNL, they call it something else, but it's SNL. The book is split into basically 3 chapters, and each of those chapters are like one big part. They're one like section of the story. So essentially in the first section, it chronicles the entire like couple of days leading up to this like SNL show. And so it's like the pitches that they do for the bits, and they meet their host and, you know, the guest star and all that kind of stuff. So she is terrible. First of all, the main character is so awful. She's deeply unfunny. This entire section is kind of boring. It's supposed to be obviously her meeting the guest star, but also he's the love interest, and it's supposed to be this kind of like a hot guy would never fall in love with an ugly girl. That's like basically the premise of the entire book, that like a movie star could never fall for someone who is below average. You're constantly being reminded by her that she's like frumpy and undesirable, but at least she's funny. She's not funny. It's really truly awful. So that's like the first part, and she ends so in the first part, these 2 characters are supposed to have a little bit of chemistry, because it's supposed to leave you wanting a little bit more, right? You're like, oh, I kind of want them to like maybe get together, except that you don't want that. You want them to stay a million miles away from each other. At the end of this, they have so few interactions, and none of them are really that great. And then when everything is said and done, they meet up at like, you know, the whole crew meets up at this bar after this like after party, and they talk for a little bit, but then she gets like really mean and judgy kind of out of nowhere, and he kind of backs off and he's like, oh, okay, just kidding. You seem like kind of maybe a bad person. He was right. So that's the end of the first part. The second part, it's spoilers don't matter. I promise. I promise. The second part is COVID. I can't tell you how little I want to be jump scared by COVID. I lived through it. I was there. I super don't want to be reminded about it. The whole second part is like they rekindle their relationship. They start exchanging emails and they want to meet up. And he's like, I live in a big mansion. Why don't you just come see me? And then she drives across the country to go see him. And then the third part is her just being in LA with him, and then like hooking up basically and figuring out where the relationship is going to go. But mind you, these are two people who met once a few years prior to this, had mildly fine interactions, and then one like bad negative interaction over the course of potentially like 48 to 72 hours. And now they're like, I love you, I can't live without you, I can't believe the chemistry that we had, it was so incredible. And it was an exhausting book. Next up, I read Men Who Hate Women by Laura Bates. I give this 5 out of 5 stars. It's so good. This is a book about the manosphere. If you're not familiar, it's basically just any space on the internet largely that creates an environment for men to kind of coalesce and talk about how much they hate women. And it's really aggressive. This book was actually, it largely talks about incels, but also like other communities even outside of the inceldom. And if you're unfamiliar with incels, bless you. Incels stands for involuntary celibate, and they're basically a group of men who think they're owed sex and they hate women because they can't get laid, and they think women are the center of all of their problems. And they're very vile. The whole point of her writing this book is truly to say we shouldn't laugh at these men anymore. Like, we need to start taking them seriously. They have committed a lot of violent crimes in the name of all of these ideologies that we're seeing spread across the manosphere. It's very concerning. I'm not gonna lie to you, this book legitimately scared me for a while. I had to read it really slowly because when I first started reading it, she talks a lot about how these men desire to be sexually violent against women, and she goes kind of into these incel forums incognito to see what these men are actually saying. And there's a lot of encouragement among these communities to be sexually violent towards women and to go out and find random women to sexually assault, and it's really awful. It was really hard to read. It was really scary. There's like one specific guy that just so stuck out to me. He wrote in a forum about how he gets so excited when he's in a parking garage alone with a woman and he's walking behind her because he knows that she feels uncomfortable and unsafe, and that makes him feel really powerful and good, and that he could attack her and take her at any moment, and that like gets him really riled up and gets him excited and happy. And that made me feel really sick inside, that there are not only that there are people out there like that, but that there are so many people, and that they are all coalescing into these spaces and encouraging each other to continue to act and think that way. And it's really, really scary. So I highly recommend it. Just, I guess, like, prepare yourself a little bit before you dive into it, because it is a lot. Next up, I have a book that I ended up DNFing, so I'll just talk about it very briefly. It's The Last Chance Library by Freya Sampson. This, I was just looking for something really lighthearted and like easy and fun. So I picked up this one, and it's just about this little old cozy library that needs funding, that the district, I think this takes place, it's somewhere in the UK, and the like county or whatever is trying to close all of these really small libraries to encourage more people to go to this like one big library. It's, you know, it's all a funding issue. And so you have our main character who's a librarian at that library, and the library is trying to like fight the system. It's also, you know, rom-com-y. There's a guy that she likes and all that stuff, but I really couldn't get into it. I not only found it really boring, but I found the main character to be really obnoxious. She's very anti-helping the library, despite being a part of the library and being faced with potentially losing her job and a place that's really important and meaningful to her. She spends the entirety of what I read, which I think I got like 30-ish% of the way through, she spends the entire time basically like constantly letting people down and constantly saying, oh, no, I'm not gonna be a part of like what you guys are doing. No, I mean, of course I wanna save the library, but I'm not gonna like make any moves to do that. And it's just not super fun to be in the head of someone who feels that way, especially as someone who loves libraries and would be devastated if I didn't have access to them. So it just isn't very fun. I wasn't having a good time, and I just decided to DNF it and move on because I was in desperate need of having a good time. Otherwise, I'm sure that she like joins the fight eventually and comes out of her shell and becomes a more interesting person, but I just wasn't interested in sticking around to find out. So the next book I read is How to Solve Your Own Murder. I don't know why I said that so slow. How to Solve Your Own Murder by Kristen Perrin. And this is like a cozy murder mystery. I wish desperately that I would have read this in December. December is way more my time for cozy murder mysteries. So I think this book was very much like right book, just kind of wrong time for me. I think in October, I'm feeling more of the like thrillery, spooky kind of vibes. I'm not in murder mystery mode. This book follows our main character, who is the niece of a woman who has been told her whole life that she was going to be murdered. So she became really obsessed with this. She was certain she was going to be murdered, and when she does inevitably get murdered, like way into her old age, she kind of sends out, like, she's super rich, and so she sends her family to kind of like do her bidding, and she's like, solve my murder for me and then you'll get the estate. And that's what everyone has to do. They have to solve her murder, figure out if she even was murdered, and they're kind of like, you know, obviously being pinned against each other. So some people know things and some people are hiding that. There's also the police are involved. So the police are very like, you obviously need to tell us everything that you're doing, but also whoever solves the murder gets the estate. And if no one solves the murder, then I think the town gets the estate. It's kind of like it's like a whole thing. I thought this was fine. There are sort of two mysteries going on, because we have the modern day where everyone's trying to figure out how she was murdered and who murdered her. Not how kind of how she was murdered. And then you have clips of the past when the woman who was murdered was like a teen, and there's some kind of mysterious stuff going on in her teen times that also, you know, get solved. When she was a teen, one of her friends disappeared. All of the sections, the chapters in the past, are kind of that story leading up to this like disappearance / murder of her friend. So you kind of have two like murder mysteries going on. I thought the story was appropriately cute and cozy. I gave it 3 out of 5 stars. It didn't wow me per se. It was fun though. Like if you really like cozy murder mysteries, especially like I think in the winter they're really nice, then I think you'll probably like this. Like there's nothing inherently wrong with it. I think it just didn't wow me. I think it's not what I was really wanting for the time. Next up, yay, next. Okay, so the next book I read was We Used to Live Here by Marcus Cleaver. This book, genuinely one of my favorite books of the year. I loved this. I was so surprised to see that it was a debut. I was also a little sad because I wanted to read more by the author, and then I couldn't because he hasn't written anything else. So in this book, we follow this couple who moves into this house in Oregon. It's like an old house, and they're there to fix it up and everything. And oh my gosh, okay, what's the couple's name? Oh, that's so funny. So on the like, whoa, okay, I'm sorry, I just opened Goodreads to read the little synopsis so that I could actually get you the names of these people, but right at the top it says Get Out meets Parasite in this eerily haunting debut, and Reddit hit. One, I didn't know it was Reddit hit. Get Out meets Parasite is actually pretty accurate. That's not terrible. Soon to be a Netflix original movie starring Blake Lively. Ew, I don't like Blake Lively. About 2 homeowners whose lives are turned upside down when the house previous residents are unexpected to visit. Yeah, but I just thought that was kind of crazy. Soon to be a Netflix original. I'm super excited about that, but I don't love the casting of Blake Lively. Anyway, so we follow this couple, Charlie and Eve. Eve is home alone one night while Charlie's out. She's running an errand, she's doing something. She's home alone, and this family stops by, and the dad is like, hey, I know this is super weird, but I used to live here. I grew up in this house. It's really nostalgic, and I have my family with me, and I just really want to show them where I grew up. It's such a beautiful house. Do you mind if we come in for just like 10 minutes? And she's really hesitant at first. She's like, that's kind of creepy. I'm home alone. I don't feel super comfortable with this. And he's like, totally understandable. You can definitely say no. It's totally fine. And she's like, it's a whole family. Like, it's probably fine. So she's like, okay, 15 minutes max, and then you have to get out of the house. I don't want you here after that. So he's like, oh great, thank you so much. So they go into the house, and then they never leave the house, and the book gets so wild and it's so exciting, and it plays with elements that I really love, but I don't want to spoil anything for you in this book, so I'll just say that the like wider story, it's very much horror. I love that feeling when you're reading any kind of thriller or horror, just really interesting story where you kind of are asking yourself like, what the fuck is going on, like the entire time. And that is so this book. I loved it. I loved it. I thought it was so much fun. I was so riveted. I was like, I was zoomed into the book the whole time. It was really good. So I highly, highly recommend it. Next up, I read The Sundown Motel by Simone St. James. I gave this 4 out of 5 stars. I gave We Used to Live Here 5 out of 5 stars. Loved it. Sundown Motel, I give it 4 out of 5 stars. I think this is more of like a 3.5 out of 5 stars. It was, I liked the broader picture. I liked what the story was kind of trying to do and like themes, but the actual execution, there are elements of it that feel kind of unnecessary. So in The Sundown Motel, we follow, oh my God, let me get names again. Carly, whose aunt had gone missing in like the 1980s, but Carly really wants to know what happened. So she kind of follows in her aunt's footsteps and goes to this town that she lived in and ends up working at this Sundown Motel at the night shift, the same shift that her aunt worked in the 80s. The book flips between the niece, Carly, and her aunt Viv, who in the 80s is also kind of aware of this town's history of women going missing, and she kind of starts to investigate that. And there's also a lot of like weird stuff that's happening at the motel. I think for me, this book, Viv's storyline is way more interesting. It's where all of the meat of the story is, and I think Carly's storyline is a distraction. I think the author wanted to have the element of you not knowing what happened to Viv, but knowing that she disappeared and is obviously murdered by now because it's been like 40 years. So the author wants you to know that going into the book, but doesn't want you to know anything else. And so I think her way of accomplishing that was by adding Carly in and having Carly like chase this mystery of her aunt and all this stuff. But Viv's story is in like, it's the book, it's the meat of the book, it's what is so good about the book. All of Carly's stuff feels really unnecessary and not super great, and it's where a lot of the like extraneous elements of the story come in. If I were an editor and I were trying to trim the fat in this book, I would trim out 90% of the things that happened in Carly's storyline because they feel really excessive and unnecessary. Whereas Viv's storyline is like tight and so interesting, and every time one of her chapters comes about, it's great. Okay, so after I read that, I reread Love on the Brain, The Love Hypothesis, and Not in Love, all by Ali Hazelwood. I mentioned earlier that I have a video that I'm working on. These were all rereads for me, and I actually had started filming that video before I reread these books, but then after like talking about Ali Hazelwood for so long, I was like, I kind of want to reread some of her books, and it was very much in like a brain dead, I need some schlock. I remember like that particular week of work was just really difficult, and so I threw them on as audiobooks, and it just helped me get through the week. So I'm not going to talk about them much here. However, what did I say I read? Love on the Brain, The Love Hypothesis, and Not in Love. Not in Love is, I think, her most recent like full book. Not my favorite of her works. I do think it focuses too much on the relationship being sexual. I think Ali Hazelwood wanted to write a more erotic book, but in doing that, you lose a lot of the actual like person-to-person chemistry. Like, yes, they have great sexual chemistry and that's great, but there's not a lot of actual connection between the two characters outside of their sexual life, which is what I think is really fun about Ali Hazelwood books, is that the characters have a lot that they connect over. It's always science. They always connect over science, and it's very cute. The other two, schlock. Fun, dumb, fun schlock. It's a good time. Okay, next I did Bright Young Women by Jessica Knoll. I gave this a 5 out of 5 stars. This, I did not realize when I read it. I knew it was like kind of based on some kind of actual serial killer. Basically, entirely based on the Ted Bundy murders. I believe all of the women in this book were real victims, but their names have been changed, and I think maybe there are some things about the stories that have been slightly tweaked, but it is essentially a retelling from the perspective of our main character, who was one of the sorority girls that survived. And it's her kind of living with this experience of knowing that all of her sorority friends are dead, dealing with the police questioning and the catching of the man, you know, all that stuff. And that's one side of the storyline. The other side, we follow one of his murder victims and kind of see her whole story up to being murdered in the past. Her story takes place before our other characters of the Before the Sorority Girls story. This is really good. There are, of course, I watched Lexi, aka Newly Nova. I love her videos, I love her channel, and she talked about this book and having kind of complicated feelings about it, feeling like there was something missing from the story, having some kind of complicated feelings about these being essentially real people and real victims and their story being packaged in such a way. And I would recommend going and watching her video about it. She did it, I think, also in a wrap up. She talked about it, but she also has a review on Goodreads that you can go read. It's really hard when talking about real victims in these scenarios. It's really tricky to try to decide how to handle this kind of thing. And I really liked the way that it talked about how essentially the Ted Bundy, the murderer, not actually that bright of a guy, just kind of gets lucky. Like the way that these serial killers get almost like treated like the boys, I don't know, treated like they're part of this like fancy boys club or something. It's really interesting. I don't know. I wish my thoughts about this book were a little bit more fleshed out, you know, a little bit. I wish that I had something like interesting to respond with, but I thought this book was really good. I thought there were a lot of moments that were really devastating. I liked how it kind of looked at and critiqued the culture around in the way that these stories depict these serial killers as being these like bright young men, which is why the book is called Bright Young Women, because these stories never fixate on the victims and the futures that they could have had as like successful and talented women. They always just kind of focus on like, how did one suburban man go so wrong? And it just feels really gross to fixate so much and to like idolize these men who are absolute creeps and literal murderers. But anyway, I digress. The book is really good. I highly recommend that you read it. I think criticism of it is super valid. I do think it's always going to be uncomfortable fictionalizing real people's stories, especially stories that come from these like really traumatic experiences. It's getting darker outside, and so we're like so fast and we're so super losing the lighting. So I'm really sorry about that. I'm trying really hard to like make sure it doesn't look terrible all the way. So I have Funny Story by Emily Henry. This is a reread for me. This book came out this year and I've already read it twice this year. I don't know, I really like it. Obviously I read it twice. I similarly want to do what I'm doing for Allie Hazelwood with Emily Henry as well. This was very much just like a comfort reread. I just wanted something comfortable. I was struggling to find something from the library. I really like it. It's one of my more favorite Emily Henry books. It's about this woman who is engaged and she's about to get married, and on the night of her husband's bachelor party, his female best friend confesses her love for him and they decide to basically run away together. So he breaks up with his fiance and she ends up going and living with Petra's boyfriend, Petra being the friend of the husband or of the fiance. Really cute, 4 out of 4, 4 out of 5. I really liked it. I'm gonna go take a break really quick and come back, hopefully with better lighting maybe. Okay, I would say that's better. I super just need to get like a ring light or something because I have literally my makeup mirror right there. But then obviously like this whole corner is super dark even though the living room light is on. I'm back. I made hot chocolate and it has whipped cream on it. Ugh. Where were we? Funny Story. Yeah, it's good. It's cute. You know what's not good and cute though? The next book that I read. I read Business Casual by B.K. Boris and I give it 2 out of 5 stars. This is one of the Lovelight Farms series. It's however many books now and they're all like, it's a tiny town and they're super connected. It's very small town charm if you're into small town charm. The thing is like, I'm not. I grew up in a small town. I really hate small towns. This one in particular, big business guy who grew up in the small town. He's currently in New York, but he is staying in the town to help out his sister while she goes on her honeymoon. He's like taking care of the farm. He sent them on their honeymoon. He's fine. He's taking care of her Christmas tree farm. And it's always a Christmas tree farm too. And the girl opened up a tattoo shop in the town, and that's the pairing. They're like always flirting, and then they decide to try to just do like the casual sex thing, but then you know they have real feelings for each other. It's very basic. It was kind of boring. I didn't really enjoy it. I have not really liked any of the Lovelight Farm books that I've read, and yet I keep trying to read them. Like for some reason in my head I'm just like, oh, it's just like the premise of this one wasn't really for me. I just didn't like the maybe there's another one that I'll like more. And I never liked them, and I need to stop reading them. I need to stop giving them a try. This is the last book for October, and ironically it's called The September House. I should have read it in September. I gave this 5 out of 5 stars, which is really high. I think it's more of like a 4.5 out of 5 stars. It's not quite the perfect book, but I really loved it. I loved the premise of this. So the premise of this book is this woman and her husband move into this old, like really old, super cool house, and it's a beautiful house and she really loves it. But every year in September, it goes like super haunted. There's bloody walls, there's screaming ghosts, there's anything, you know, everything that you can think of that comes with a haunted house. And she just like lives through it. Instead of running to the hills and being like, oh my God, it's a demon house and we have to leave, she's very like, I'll just adapt. Like, this is my house. I live here. I love this house. And I'm not leaving. I really, really liked this book. I was actually really surprised when I finished it how sad I felt in like leaving these characters behind, because I genuinely became really attached to them. The premise of this book is this woman lives in this house. It's coming closer to September and her husband has been missing for a while. He kind of left, but she's been very kind of like wishy-washy with her daughter as to where he is and what happened and why he left. And so the daughter is getting really concerned. She's like, if you know, you have to file a missing persons report and all these things. And the mother's kind of like hemming and hawing her way through it. So the daughter is like, I'm just gonna come visit and we're just gonna figure this out. And of course it's getting close to September. So she's like, oh, literally any other time of the year, but not September, don't come in September. So the whole book, she's kind of trying to keep all of this haunting away from her daughter. It's like almost comical. This book is really interesting. It kind of juggles a lot tonally and both genre-wise, but it handles it all really well. The book is very much about trauma and how we can repress it, and how oftentimes if you are in a really bad environment, a response to that can just be adapting and convincing yourself that that's normal and it's fine as long as you adapt and figure it out. And so it's actually a very sad story in a lot of ways. So I do, you know, recommend checking trigger warnings because it does kind of get into trauma, but there's a lot about this book that is also just like tonally fun. Like there's a lot about this book that can sometimes feel like goofy, but in a fun way. I love that it kind of deals with a lot of like normal horror, you know, haunted house tropes. There's bloody walls and there's ghosts that are literally like screaming and doing these awful things and trying to, there's this one ghost that's like a kid and he's always trying to like bite you and you just have to like move around him. He doesn't like it when people get too close. There's this other ghost that's like screaming in this room up above, and I love this one scene because she just looks at this ghost and she's like, oh, just shut up already. And she's just like so over it. And I just really love it. It's really fun to see a character existing in this world instead of like actively fighting it. She really should be dealing with it, but it's also just kind of fun. Like she's just living with it. She's like, all right, I mean, this is just, the kid bites. If you walk around him, he won't bite. Like, it's just really fun. And I love her reaction to everything. It's very gory. I mean, it is still like horror. I wouldn't say that this is a comedy book, but it has some great comedic moments in it. And I also love sometimes just the absurd nature of her trying to keep all of this stuff from her daughter. I will say, I don't think that like the plot twists or any of these like major story beats are gonna shock you. I think the book is relatively predictable in the like on the mystery side of things, but that didn't ruin my experience of the book. I just really liked what I had to say about trauma and watching someone kind of deal with it by not dealing with it. Okay, so that's the end of October. How exciting was that? Okay, so moving into November. So like I said, November, you're gonna see it. You're gonna see it so hard. I really wanted to just read all of Stormlight in November, but then I also wanted to read things that were comforting. So starting with The Way of Kings by Mr. Brandon Sanderson. This is the first book in the Stormlight Archive series. It is my favorite series of all time. I love it so much. Big Brandon Sanderson fan. How to briefly describe the Stormlight Archive series to you? I don't know, man. It's 5 books. All of them are well over 1,000 pages with the exception of the first book, which is exactly 1,000 pages. There's a lot to discuss, but essentially you follow 4 main characters in the first book. You follow Adeline, Kaladin, Shallan, and Dalinar. So the book opens on the death of King Gavilar. Him and the Parshendi, who are a group of people, are kind of creating this peace agreement. And on the night that they sign the agreement, the Parshendi send an assassin after the king and they kill Gavilar. And this sends Alethikar, listen, the names in the series truly eventually just have to be whatever you want them to be. It's a lot. It sends Alethikar, Alethikar. I've never said that out loud before. It sounds so wrong. Into war with the Parshendi. And this is kind of where we open up the book. They've been at war for, I believe, 6 years at this point. And Dalinar is the brother of the king. And so he's there very much for revenge. And then you have Adeline, who is the son of Dalinar. There's a lot of butting of heads between him and his father because his father is trying to kind of play this political game and he's not like a very political man. And so Adeline is kind of constantly trying to push him to realize that these politics just are not working out. Next to that, you have Kaladin, who is a slave, and each Stormlight book follows one character a little bit closer than the others because you get snapshots of the past of their sort of story leading up to this moment. And so the first book, you follow Kaladin's past. We learn that he's a slave and he became a slave by killing someone. All of the past chapters that we get with Kaladin are kind of leading up to like how he became a slave. Shallan, what to say about Shallan? Her father has died, and one of his secrets to like keeping their house alive is having this Fabrial, which is a thing in this world that can help, like, it like creates and destroys kind of a thing. It's too complicated to explain. Their house is in terrible debt and they realize, her and her brothers realize, that her father was using this Fabrial to help keep their house out of debt and help keep it lucrative. And so Shallan goes off to attempt to steal a Fabrial from Jasna Kholin, who is the smartest woman in the world. So that's the Way of Kings. My favorite thing about this series is how do you pick one thing? I love how you get so attached to the characters. You are so interested in the world. Brandon Sanderson always does in all of his books an incredible job of sprinkling a bit of mystery throughout any of his books. So rereading them is always a treat. I have read Way of Kings and Words of Radiance 3 times. I just finished Words of Radiance today. The way he writes these incredibly emotional moments, like rereading the series, I've teared up so many times in these first 2 books, not even necessarily because anything sad is happening, but there are just some really glorious moments and they always make me really emotional and I get a little teary-eyed because it's just so exciting to see these things play out. It's so exciting to see these characters reach their highs because they really deserve them, because oh my god, they have some low lows. It's so good. Okay, so now that I'm done talking about Stormlight, let's talk about all the other books that I read in November. So, oh god, okay. In a Not So Perfect World by Neeli Chupati Alexander. I know I butchered that and I'm so sorry. This book sucked. I gave it 2 out of 5 stars. This one, I was like trying to chase the high of the Ali Hazelwood books. Remember earlier when I talked about how I really love video games, and seeing characters who also love video games is just really cool. So this book, we follow our main character who is trying to get this job at this video game company. The video game company is wildly sexist. It is disgusting. In her interview, they basically tell her that if they're gonna hire her, she needs to be dedicated to the job and she's not allowed to date anybody, which is like crazy HR violation. You could never get away with it, but she's really dumb. And so she's like, yeah, that's totally fine. I mean, this is my dream job. I mean, they're treating me like shit even in the interview, but it's my dream job. So part of that interview process, part of like the next step interview process, is that she has to create a little demo for a game so that they can see a little bit of her like style or whatever. She's also coming out of a relationship, out of a bad breakup, and her neighbor next door, who's this really hot guy who she randomly kissed on a night. None of this is really that important. He just broke up with his girlfriend and he has like a week-long vacation to this place or whatever. And he's like, why don't you just go with me? I don't want to waste the ticket. I don't want to waste the money. Just come with me on this couple's vacation. And she, not knowing this man but at all, says, yeah, that sounds like a great idea. I can work on my video game on vacation. This book is not a good time. It is not fun. I think the characters are deeply insufferable. I think the romance that like builds from this insane let's go on a vacation together even though we're strangers, but we're kind of not because we're neighbors. I don't know, it sucked. It sucked. I don't have anything nice to say about this book. There is no love of video games here. The author paints like the industry. Yes, the video game industry is not a great industry to work in. I have heard horror stories. I'm sure we've all heard horror stories about the video game industry. I'm not trying to defend it, and it is certainly sexist, and I'm not trying to defend that either. But none of it felt very grounded, and it also felt so much like the author just kind of like looks down on video games, which I didn't really love that feeling. So yeah, overall, I really hated this book. I wouldn't recommend it. I don't think you're gonna enjoy it. The only reason it wasn't a 1-star, I think, is because there is like one cute scene while they're on vacation where there's like a cute little competition thing that they become a part of. And I thought that was like kind of fun. Otherwise, whole thing sucked. Next, I have The 7 Necessary Sins for Women and Girls by Mona. I'm gonna have to actually pick up my laptop for this. Sorry. By Mona. I know I'm butchering these, and I'm really, really sorry. Eltawe? Maybe? Mona Eltawe? This is another feminist book. It's really great. There are obviously 7 parts because there are 7 sins. What I really, really loved, and I think got a lot of out of this book, is that Mona was born in Cairo, and she's lived in several different countries. She's very international. She's very worldly and very experienced. And it was just really interesting to get to read a feminist book that wasn't really centered around America and like American women. She did talk about America. She lives in America now, but it was just really cool to see a perspective from, you know, someone in another country, and to also hear more about women's rights issues in other countries as well. I just thought it was really enlightening and really interesting. It's actually a book. I got it from the library. I would love to physically own it and reread it and annotate it. Definitely the kind of book that I want to engage with more. Next, I did Cruel Winter with You by Ali Hazelwood. This is a very, very short story. I think it was less than 100 pages, almost certainly less than 150. And it's part, I think, of a cute little winter collection that a bunch of different rom-com authors did. This one has the exact same problem that I have with all of the other Ali Hazelwood short stories, minus the one that I really liked. And that's that I can't stand short stories. They don't have enough room to breathe. Everything happens really quickly. It feels like we're rushing to get to the sex scene, and then it happens and it's kind of like, now what? Not a big fan of it, but like it was fine. I mean, if you really like Ali Hazelwood and you don't mind the short stories, you're probably gonna love it. It's fine. It's Ali Hazelwood. It's exactly what you would expect it to be. Oh, the premise. These two people knew each other their entire lives growing up. They were neighbors and friends, and then they had an awkward encounter as adults, and now she's back home for Christmas and is like snowed in at his house, and they have to confront their awkward moment. Next I did Honestly, I'm Totally Faking It by Amanda Gambill. This was fine. It was another rom-com. You can tell that my brain was absolute mush in the month of November. It's about this girl who works for a like personal assistant company, and this guy is like notorious for for firing personal assistants and being really picky and mean. And she ends up working for him through a terrible chain of events. He is on like a webcam call. She didn't think he was home. They hadn't met before at this point. And he's like live on CNN or something. He's trying to be the mayor of this town or city, so he's a politician. And she walks out. She took a shower in his house and walks out naked in front of like the whole world. And he makes up this story about, oh, sorry, that was my girlfriend, because he didn't want to be like, I don't know who the fuck that is. This is, because that's not going to look very good on live television. So he's like, we're just trying to work out schedules. My bad. Chat later. And obviously he's like, you're fired. That was awful. But his PR team was kind of like, hey, you are like deeply unlikable, and people kind of like that maybe you have a girlfriend and this made you look a little bit more human. So maybe we just pretend. Maybe you do a little fake dating. And of course they fall in love. It's fine. I mean, it was cute. I think it definitely fulfilled the like mushy brain necessity. What did I give it? I gave it 3 out of 5 stars. That feels fine. It was very middle of the road. Not the kind of romance that I thought was super cute or had a lot of cute moments that I thought was great. I didn't particularly love either of the characters, but I didn't find them to be like insufferable. Truly a middle of the road romance. I feel like I have talked about a lot of like rom-com-y books in this video, and I feel like all of them have been so baseline for me. Rom-coms are not my favorite. They're very much like a comfort food for me, but the problem is that I don't like adore them, and yet they're so fast to get through. They're so easy to listen to at work. My job is very, very boring. It's very monotonous. So rom-coms sometimes just make the days go by faster. So I end up reading a lot of them throughout the year, but it is always kind of unfortunate because they're not like my favorite genre. I don't like love rom-coms. I just happen to be reading them a lot because of the job that I have. Anyway, moving into even more rom-coms. So this is where we start getting into like Christmas book territory. So I tried Wreck the Halls by Tessa Bailey. I gave it 2 out of 5 stars. Hated it. Thought it was dreadful. It's about these 2 characters who are the kids of this girl band. Both of their mothers were a part of this girl band that had this like famous breakup in the whatever times, and the whole world wants the band to get back together, so they agree to be a part of a 24-hour live stream, or it's not 24 hours actually, they get the night off, but they agree to be a part of like a live stream that's pretty constant in an attempt to like get the band back together. I don't know, it's all kind of stupid. Their whole origin story is they met once when they were 16, and that meeting was like really powerful, and they always felt like they should have been friends because they were in kind of similar situations, being kids of famous people, but they never reached out to each other, and so they just never garnered that friendship, but they've always thought about each other, and now they're in like their 30s or some shit, and they go crazy for each other. Now they're on this live stream, and their chemistry is off the charts, and they just adore each other, and I don't know, it was one of those stories that was like way too much, way too fast, and the drama was stupid. The conflict was dumb. It was Christmassy-ish. I also just don't care about bands like getting back together, so I wasn't really invested in that storyline. I wasn't like super invested in them as a couple. Like it wasn't really super for me. Okay, moving into the last 2 books. This next one, I did start a vlog for this one, and I do intend to finish it, and I do intend to put this vlog out sometime in December. I got a bunch of Christmas rom-com books from Kindle Unlimited, and it is my intention to like read them and kind of vlog the experience, and we'll have a good time. It'll be really fun. So I'm not going to go into great detail with this book, but know that this is one of the worst books I've maybe ever read. Like, it makes romantic comedy look like Call Me By Your Name. It was so abysmally bad, and I still don't know if it's like bad on purpose, like it knows that it's bad, or if it's trying to be sincere. I don't know. So this book is Good Elf Gone Wrong by Alina Jacobs. It is one of currently 2 books, but I imagine that she's gonna write a bunch more. She's written a few other Christmassy books. I don't think I'll read any of those. I am currently trying to read the second one. This first one was like 550 pages, and I tell you what, did not need to be 550 pages. So let me walk you through this. Essentially, this book is a fake dating Christmas book. You have a main character who decides that she like needs to bring a bad boy home because her fiance the Christmas prior cheated on her with her sister, and they were supposed to get married on Christmas, and she discovered this like Christmas morning, and she's like, what the fuck is happening? And he has this insane reaction, her whole family has this insane reaction. He's like, we can still get married, don't worry. Like, I was gonna let you have your wedding and then quietly get annulled later because I'm in love with your sister. But he ends up getting engaged to the sister like literally the next day, and the whole family is like, you just need to get over it and be happy for her. Like, she is such a doormat of a character. She has no spine whatsoever. She just has to live with it. So a year later, we're at the next Christmas, and her sister is getting married on Christmas. And so it's the like 2 or 3 weeks leading up to Christmas Day. And she decides that she wants to break up her sister and her ex because they did a terrible, horrible thing, and she wants revenge. So she hires this guy who's this like bad boy to be her bad boy boyfriend. But he's like an abysmal person. Like, he's not a bad boy. He's a dick. He's an asshole. He's so mean. He's insanely disrespectful. He's wildly crude. I had 6 minutes left on my memory card and 2 books to talk about, and I locked in. I was like, let's go. Let's do this. And then my camera battery died. So we're back. I believe I was talking about Good Elf Gone Wrong and just how freaking insane this book is, how awful this character is. He's deranged. He's not fun. There's nothing like fun and silly about this character. Genuinely a very bad time. And I can't decide if this book is like meant to be bad. And this man is like super asshole-ish, but like half of her family is really into it. It's borderline really sexist. Like he basically is like, every woman basically wants to be treated like shit. And he's proven right because half of her family is really into the fact that he treats her like shit. So it's super bizarre. I think when I started reading it, I was like, oh, obviously this book isn't taking itself seriously. It knows it's a bad book. It knows that these things are crazy and deranged. But then it still plays out exactly like every other rom-com where they like fall in love and all the things and the wild sex scenes. So it never really condemns his like bad behavior. It just always chalks everything up to like, oh, but he's just a bad boy falling for a good girl. And I'm like, not really though. Like he's a truly bad person. I started the second book. I haven't finished it yet though, but I think I'm going to try to continue it in that vlog. So the last book that I'm talking about for November is The Bright Sword by Lev Grossman. And this was actually a DNF for me. I DNF'd it at around 60%. And I honestly so genuinely devastated that I ended up DNFing this. I really, really wanted to like this book. I mean, for starters, the cover is stunning. And I was really hoping that I would like it so that I could buy it and put it on my bookshelf. Outside of like the petty reasons, I really liked the premise of this. And even as I was reading it, I really liked the writing, but it's just not my kind of fantasy story. So The Bright Sword by Lev Grossman is an Arthurian retelling. And I think it's really authentic to the Arthurian tale and like medieval storytelling. Now, I personally am not super familiar with the whole tale of King Arthur and the Knights of the Round Table. I mean, I know like all the normal things that I feel like everybody knows, but growing up, I grew up on the show Merlin. It's not like super accurate to the original story, you know, by any means. The Bright Sword is supposed to be like Lev Grossman's take on the Arthurian tale, and it's meant to be like a little bit darker. We follow this knight who is coming from this little island, and his like whole dream is to become a knight of the Round Table. But when he gets to Camelot and the Round Table, he finds that King Arthur is already dead. The final battle has already happened. Mordred's already killed him, and like all of the things in the Arthurian tale have already passed. And now it's essentially like him and the Knights of the Round Table waiting for King Arthur to return, because that's the legend that someday he'll return when Camelot needs him the most. And it's a lot of men from another time clinging to that time, not letting it go, not being able to progress as a society and like move on. So following Callum, I think is his name, or Callum, following his story is, you know, following the knights as they traverse the world trying to find King Arthur, trying to find another knight, trying to basically do whatever they can to bring Camelot to its like prior glory. And then we also get kind of interludes about each of the knights, and we get their stories of kind of how they became Knights of the Round Table, and we can see King Arthur through their eyes and see what Camelot was and all these things. And the writing is really nice. It's very, you know, it's not necessarily beautiful writing, but the story itself, the story to me anyway, feels like very medieval. And I'm not like super familiar with medieval literature, but it's told in kind of a lot of snippets and things. It's very questy. So the whole book is them. They're just going on quests. A lot of the past night stories are about quests that they've done. It's very, and he went to these lands and slayed this beast and was a part of this thing and this thing and this, you know, and it's just not my thing. I really wanted to like it. I really wanted to be into it. I respect it so much for what it is and what it's doing, but I could never bring myself to like push through to the end. So I just DNF'd it at 60% and returned it and called it what it is. Maybe someday I will return to it and try to finish it. But it's very slow. It's very dense. And I think you really have to already love that kind of story to dive into it. That's how I feel about The Bright Sword. Yeah, so those are all of the books that I read in October and November. Thank you so much for watching this video. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and comment. Let me know what you read those last couple months. Let me know what your TBR is, what you're planning to read, especially for December. I need some good book recommendations. Give me cozy, give me December vibes, just anything to make me happy. And I hope that you guys have a really wonderful upcoming month. I genuinely do have some videos that are cooking, and so I really need to get them out and just like edit them and bring it all together. But thank you so much for being patient, and I will see you guys in another video hopefully soon. Goodbye.